What's up, guys? It's Emperor John Kill 3D Gaming here, and the vote came through that for this video, the topic will be the first console I ever owned. Now, I would say for most kids that was born in the early to mid 90s, as we grew up, we had Super Nintendo. I know at the time this was at the height of Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo. But what we had in the house at the time was a Super Nintendo. It belonged to my sisters. It belonged to me. It was basically overall our system until they got the N64, and then the Super Nintendo was all to myself. So at this point, games were really cheap, or I adopted a lot of their games. I adopted some of my cousins' games. I adopted a couple of games from my uncles. So I had basically amassed my own Super Nintendo collection from what I was given. I don't remember ever having a Super Nintendo. Like, not every game was bought. I would say only a few were bought for me by my mom. That when she just started buying me video games, was Mortal Kombat 2, Doom Doom, Super Castlevania 4, and Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage. So two of my games had red cases. The rest of the games, I can name a few. Like, I'd had an entire crate's worth of SNES games. And I don't remember all of them, but I do know the ones that I spent the most time in. Now, the ones that weren't bought for me that I adopted over was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the video game based on the movie, which is the best Power Rangers game to date. Fight me on it. I did have Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 from them later down the line because they were still getting games for the Super Nintendo. And the first time I ever got a chance to really play a Super Nintendo on my own was playing Mortal Kombat 2. So that's a hell of a way for a kid to start off immediately with fatalities, blood, and violence, and I was surprisingly good at the game. You know, when other kids would come over to the house, from my uncle's kids to my first nephew that was born at the time, since I had the game to myself, I was the one who was always ahead, using Baraka, using Raiden, using Scorpion and Sub-Zero, mastering my characters. But then I ended up playing Castlevania for the first time, which was Super Castlevania 4, not knowing that it was a remake of an NES game. See, the Super Nintendo was the first system that I thought was, okay, this is the start of gaming. No, I learned later down the line that this wasn't the first Nintendo. At the time, that's what I believed. But we had Mario Kart. I know I had Super Mario World. I also had the Mario collection. I forgot the name of it, the full title, but it had Mario Bros, Super Mario 2, Super Mario 3, and then, those games along the line. I know we did have X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. That was my first, that was the first time I saw the X-Men, because the first superhero game I really started playing was Spider-Man Maximum Carnage, and then Spider-Man was the first licensed game that I got into, because then I clearly continued playing into the Super Nintendo, played the Super Nintendo Spider-Man game, played the PlayStation Spider-Man game, the Spider-Man 2000, all that. That really jump-started me into the hero games. And then my second favorite on the Super Nintendo was X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. Now, one time I didn't own it, this would have been the first time I played Dragon Ball Z, but I didn't play my first Dragon Ball Z game until Dragon Ball Z Budokai. But I saw the Ultimate Butoden 1 and 2 on a shelf, the English versions, mind you. And my cousin, he had one on his Super Nintendo, but I never got a chance to play it, obviously. So I had quite a few games, My sister, she was a fan of playing Sim City on there. I think it was Sim City. Yeah, the Sim City on the Super Nintendo. Sim Ant was one of theirs. Final Fantasy was theirs. Now, the game we would play together that me and my sisters would play together would be Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, you know, the two-player cooperative stuff. Oh my goodness, Zombies Ate My Neighbors would be just, it was a grand old time. It was one of the best two-player and first zombie games I actually ever played. A lot of people were like, Resident Evil was the first game they started with when they were young. No, mine was Zombies Ate My Neighbors. And at this point, I started to really play video games more and more. I didn't really do things the traditional kids did. My mom noticed that I didn't really like going outside. I just didn't like sport. And I was already like this prior, but I just didn't have something that cemented a hobby yet that would, you know, prevent me from wanting to go outside, because obviously going outside wasn't my thing. And at this time I was watching Yu-Gi-Oh on TV, getting into the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. And by this point we're getting into the N64, more of the N64 games. And I also had an N64 right when, like, every time I had a system, it would be adopted over. So my Nintendo systems came from my sisters. So I had a Super Nintendo alongside a green N64. But my Super Nintendo, since we didn't have a lot of games for the N64, I still played. We only had 3 games. We had Donkey Kong 64, Mario War. What was that Mario? Mario 3D, 3D Mario, something like that. It was just the Mario 64. There you go, Mario 64, and 007 GoldenEye. I only had those 3 games. The rest of my game time was spent on Super Nintendo, and I don't know if Super Nintendo had a lot of different editions back then, because some people, like, I only know Super Famicom had a different looking design, and the SNES had that the famous blocky looking purple and gray look that turned yellow over time. Mine never did. Mine still looked the same, and my controllers still work to this day. But my Super Nintendo was red, and I know you guys have seen it before in the background of my videos, or sometimes when you see my stuff in the background, I have it with the Super Mario cartridge somewhere. But yeah, I mean, I don't have all my games anymore, which sucks, and I only have one working controller, and the Mario game was one of the ones that still works, but I still keep it. I keep it for not only its nostalgic purpose to me, but it was really the start of me gaming. And Final Fantasy I discovered through there. Didn't know the numbering system at the time, obviously. Chrono Trigger was something my cousin introduced me to when I was younger, because he would play it. He had a better understanding of RPGs than I did. Me, I was just playing things that were straightforward. I had a few of the Mega Man X games. I think there was a Mega Man 8 or a Mega Man 9 on Super Nintendo. You know, correct me if I'm wrong. I just had a very varied amount of different things. Oh, I know I had the Donkey Kong Country games. Like, basically all the main mascot games at that time I owned in a big ass crate full of games. Black crate full of cartridges. And my favorite one. The first RPG I truly went through on my own was Super Mario RPG. I did that on my own. You know, that was the first time I truly felt like I accomplished a game. Because one game that I still, you know, it takes 2 people to beat it. You can't beat it on your own unless you're really good. And surprisingly, it being hard for it supposed to be being a kid's game was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers video game. But it was so fun to play. Morphing, the music, the atmosphere, like, that was one of the best licensed games. Like, Super Nintendo always had the best licensed games based on projects. You know, Super Nintendo was appropriate for film adaptation games or TV show adaptation games, because at least Super Nintendo could do them right. But when we got to the dark years of the PS3 360 era, those movie tie-in games, whoo, with only a few being good, I would say Super Nintendo, PS2, and them got it correct. But yeah, Super Nintendo was the first game I ever owned, guys, with quite a few games to get me started. So yeah, this is Emperor John Kill 3D Gaming, I'm gonna catch you all next time, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video.